My studies at Cambridge University was in the Romantic writers. I looked to that period in history where the Romantic writers like Blake and Shelley and the others were looking for that utopia that was about to dawn, as it were, and had seen how suddenly it had come crashing in disaster on the heels of the French Revolution and so on. But as I read the Romantic writers, I found myself resonating within my own heart over the issues they raised, sometimes so existentially persuasive, if not philosophically sophisticated. So the approach I have taken is this: I want to go through the different stages that you and I live through in our lifetimes, all the way from childhood, if we live long enough, to our senior years, how meaninglessness manifests itself at different stages, giving us the same intimation at every stage.
One of the more unfortunate characters in Greek mythology is Sisyphus. Sisyphus reaped the displeasure of the gods and was sentenced to perform the same task over and over again. He was to roll a massive stone to the top of a great hill, watch it roll down again, and then repeat the exercise endlessly. Obviously, the real punishment was in his gut-wrenching feeling of futility and routine. Though we may hate to admit it, though we do our best to avoid it, millions of us share this same feeling of futility. We grow uneasy with the routine of life, and sooner or later we wonder if life really has any meaning. Well, during the next 30 minutes, we want to offer hope that your life does indeed have meaning. Welcome to Let My People Think, the weekly program with Christian apologist and teacher, Ravi Zacharias. Dr. Zacharias had the privilege of addressing audiences at Ohio State University during the Veritas Forum, a gathering of students, faculty, and guests who discussed the truth claims of Jesus Christ. Today's message, entitled In Search of Meaning, is taken from Ravi's delivery at the forum. The cry of meaninglessness seems to be a more common refrain across all generations these days. The fact is that although we pursue pleasure, success, and wealth, we still come back to the question, what's it all for anyway? Ravi looks at the different stages of life, from childhood through adulthood, to show that life apart from the reality of God will naturally seem meaningless, while acknowledging God unites the many aspects of our existence. Now, here's Ravi.
I want to deal with the struggle existentially of humanity's search for meaning. Let me make for you a couple of introductory comments before I move into the meat of what I want to say to you and explain to you why I'm positioning my talk this way. I don't often quote D.H. Lawrence, but I would like to in the opening remarks of this particular address. D.H. Lawrence said this: we want to delude ourselves that at the problem of our emptiness, love is at the root. He said, I want to say to you, it isn't. Love is only the branches. The root goes beyond love, a naked kind of isolation, an isolated me that does not meet and mingle and never can. It is true what I say. There is a beyond in you and a beyond in me, which goes further than love. Just as some stars are beyond the scope of our vision, so our own search goes beyond the scope of love. At least I think that it is at the root, says he, going beyond love itself. Listen to the words of Thomas Wolfe. The whole conviction of my life now rests upon the belief that a sense of loneliness, far from being a rare and curious phenomenon, peculiar to myself and to a few other solitary people, is the central and inevitable fact of human existence. All this hideous doubt, despair, and dark confusion of the soul, a lonely person must know, for he is united to no image save that which he creates himself. He is bolstered by no other knowledge save that which he can gather for himself with the vision of his own eyes and brain. He is sustained and cheered and aided by no party. He is given comfort by no creed. He has no faith in him except his own, and often that faith deserts him, leaving him shaken and filled with impotence. And then it seems to him that his life has come to nothing, that he is ruined, lost, and broken past redemption. And that morning, that bright and shining morning, with its promise of new beginnings, will never come upon the earth again as it did once. A few years ago, I happened to be in a city that I shall leave unnamed, and I was presenting a series of sermons in the evening and lectures in the university in the afternoon. And there was a woman who sat in the front row at every one of those sessions, taking rather copious notes. She never said anything. She would write down what was said and would leave immediately. On the last night she came to me and she said, "May I have a few minutes with you, please?" She says, "My husband was a leading heart surgeon in this city." She said, "He has made a very, very successful living." She said, "Ravi, everybody here knew him. He was a very renowned man and a practitioner who really loved his patients." She said, "In fact, for all the years that we were married, I knew him as a man deeply devoted to his profession. Every night around midnight, the alarm would ring in our home. He would get up and he would go to do his hospital rounds for those upon whom he performed surgery in that morning. And then he would come back around 2 or 3. This routine he carried on every night, every working day. A very devoted professional." And she said, "But something happened one night that has drastically changed my life." She said, "I don't know how to explain it. I can take you to the corner of this one of the city here and show you a whole row of apartment buildings that belongs to my name. So I have no explanation for why my husband did what he did." She said, "I heard a sudden thud that woke me up around 5 o'clock in the morning. And as I sat up, jolted by it in bed, and looked around and saw that my husband was not there, and wondered if he had dropped something, but it seemed such a loud noise. And as I looked through the open door, I could sense there was a light on in the kitchen. I walked over there, and as I walked into the kitchen, saw my husband with his forehead laying flat on the kitchen table. And I knew something was drastically wrong the way his head was on that table. I looked over that kitchen table, and there was a pen in his hand and a paper, and on that piece of paper it began with these words, addressed to me and to the children. He said, "Some people die natural deaths, but others, unable to face life anymore, choose to go a different route. I just cannot face it. Please don't ask me why. I'm leaving everything to you. All the money that we have earned materially, you will all be very comfortable. Please forgive me for what I am going to do." And he chose to commit suicide. And she just sobbed uncontrollably. And I suppose she came to me because of the various themes that were addressed, but I was still a stranger. She said, "Can you explain what happened?" I said, "I really can't. I don't know your husband, and even if you do know the person, it is difficult." I said, "But may I say something to you as crisply as I can?" I said, "In my travels all over the globe, I have found one thing to be true, that for many, despair is not a moment, it is a way of life. For many, despair is not a moment, it is a way of life." The fundamental question in my life is to find the truth that would unify knowledge. And I believe as you are here tonight, and as I try my best, dear friends, within the limited context that I have in this field, I'm not sure I have all the answers for you, but I'll do my best to dissect it, and I want to take a different route. My studies at Cambridge University was in the Romantic writers. I looked to that period in history where the Romantic writers like Blake and Shelley and the others were looking for that utopia that was about to dawn, as it were, and had seen how suddenly it had come crashing in disaster on the heels of the French Revolution and so on. But as I read the Romantic writers, I found myself resonating within my own heart over the issues they raised, sometimes so existentially persuasive, if not philosophically sophisticated. So the approach I have taken is this: I want to go through the different stages that you and I lived through in our lifetimes, all the way from childhood, if we live long enough, to our senior years, how meaninglessness manifests itself at different stages, giving us the same intimation at every stage. So please bear with me, even though I start with the childhood stage, which may seem so distant to your question now. I want to find an anchor of what the intimations are in the world of a child before we move into our own context to find the answer. It was William Shakespeare who said, "All the world is a stage, and all the men and women are merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts, his acts being 7 ages. Infancy, schoolboy, lover, soldier, middle age, decline, and old age. And the last scene of all, which ends this strange, eventful history, is second childishness and mere oblivion, sans teeth, sans eyes, sans taste, sans everything." We go through these 7 stages here. May I take at least 2 or 3 of them, although I do not submit to the idea that it is merely players making exits and entrances, although I think Fyodor Dostoevsky was prophetic when he said first art would imitate life, then life would imitate art, and then life would find the very reason for its existence from the arts. But let me take it, trying to at least keep within these categories. First, the world of a child. What is it that a child really looks for when he or she is looking for meaning? Isn't it undeniably that sense of wonder? Undeniably that sense of wonder. And maybe that's why we respond to them with the kindness that we try to as we look into the world of a little child. I recall, as I became a young father, how to see my children teaching me things that I would never have learned in any academic pursuit. I recall once crossing over from Jordan into Israel, going across the Allenby Bridge, where the Jordanian porter brought us halfway to the bridge, left our suitcases and walked away, and the Israeli porter took us into the West Bank. We were surrounded by machine gun-toting soldiers, and the situation was grim. Lot of hard, intense questioning, some that seemed so harsh and rude as men and women were trying to explain their reason why they were coming in. And I was told I could be there all day with rigorous questioning. And my little 2-year-old daughter Sarah was with me, and my wife Margie. And I recall all of a sudden amongst this room teeming with people, angry voices, angry interaction. And all of a sudden it seemed as though for a moment everything was silent. Everybody was silent for just a fraction of a moment, only to find out that my daughter was going to break that silence. And in her squeaky voice, she looked at one soldier, machine gun slung over his shoulder, and she said, "Excuse me, sir, do you have any bubble gum?" I can never tell you, never fully explain to you what happened in that room. Anybody who understood English could not contain their laughter. Every person behind the desk leaned over to see who said that. She was only a 2-year-old. And then this is what happened. One of the Israeli soldiers, he just kept staring at her, a young man. He took his machine gun. Everybody looked at what he was going to do to this question. He took his machine gun, handed over to one of his colleagues, came over, buckled down on his knees, picked up my little girl in his arms, walked away from the room into the back room, came out a minute or 2 later. I wasn't answering questions very carefully at that point. I wondered where my girl had gone. And 2 or 3 minutes later, he came back clutching her in one arm, a tray with 3 glasses of lemonade in the other, one for Sarah, one for my wife, one for myself. We were in and out of there in 25 minutes. He put us in his Jeep and drove us to the taxi stand, and we were on our way to Jericho. In that one simple statement, she raised her keep for the whole year. The power of a young life. Incredible. That all of a sudden it seemed as though a war was going to come to a standstill, at least for one man, because he saw in her something that transcended our world of warfare and hatred and intolerance and suspicion. All this little girl could think of was that chewing gum would solve the answer for her problems at that particular moment. I remember sometime after that, and please bear with me because I think we'll move to higher thinking here, but I just want to lay it in context. My little boy, when Nathan was about 1 or so, how he entertained himself one Sunday morning, letting a helium balloon go up into the ceiling in the living room. Then he would jump up onto the arm of the sofa, clutch the string, pull it down. It was wonderful. He decided to do it again. Stepped down from the sofa, let the helium balloon go, watched it float to the ceiling, jumped up onto the arm of the sofa, clutched the string, pulled it down. G.K. Chesterton said, part of God's infinity is manifested in a little child's propensity to exult in the monotonous. Part of God's infinity is manifested in a little child's propensity to exult in the monotonous. What does a child say when you throw him or her up into the air? Do it again. Do it again. Do it again. What do you think God says to the sun every morning? Contrary David Hume, you know. Do it again. Do it again. Do it again. Exulting in the monotonous, because there was something so wonderful in the process. But my little boy's finitude dawned suddenly. He decided he would go outside and try the same trick. He let the balloon go, and alas, it did. And there was no sofa big enough for him to stand on and get it back. And he broke into uncontrollable sobs. His world had collapsed before his eyes until he saw me coming out of there and saying, "I know what you can do, Daddy. Next time you're on a plane, would you please bring it back for me?" The world of a child, both strong to control an adult and so vulnerable in being unable to differentiate between what was fact and what was fantasy, what was plausible and what was implausible. But as that child grows, do you notice where that wonder comes? That wonder comes in the fairy tales. All over the world you have folklore, stories that entertain little ones. And if you notice, something fascinating happens in those fairy tales. And by the way, that was the first time the word moral ever began to be used with the ideation with which we use it now, where the idea of a principle emerged in these children's stories. The idea of a moral. So Beauty and the Beast, you've got to love something before someone before they become lovable. How Cinderella told them about the exaltation of the humble. How Sleeping Beauty told them that you can be blessed with many, many gifts and yet cursed with the curse of death, and how even death can be softened to the effect of a sleep. And all this enchantment, all this world of a fairyland. But as you are an adult, you begin to notice something happens in these fairy tales that the child never progresses beyond. And it is this: as an adult, when you're reading those fairy stories, you notice two things immediately leaping to the adult mind. Number one, there is always a condition. If you don't come back by such and such, you will become a such and such. If you don't come back by 12 o'clock, you will become a pumpkin. Have you ever noticed the person never ever says to the fairy godmother, "How come?" I strongly suspect because the fairy godmother will turn to the person and say, "If that's the way you want it, will you tell me how come there is a fairyland?" This is precisely the line of questioning God undertook with Job. Job was throwing question after question after question, because he could not explain a sovereign, infinite, all-loving God why he was dealing with such a good man in this manner. And the intimation of Job's questioning was, I'm a rational human being, and I only accept that which I comprehensively understand, and I want you now to give me a comprehensive answer for why I'm sitting in this ash pile when I have lived such an upright life before you. If you are who you claim to be, I learned if you're good, you'll be blessed. If you're bad, you'll be cursed. I've been good, I'm getting cursed. My theology is in a shambles. Would you please tell me what's wrong with this whole rational process I'm in? And God, when finally he broke the silence in a masterstroke of genius, rather than coming out with a flurry of answers, he says, Job, you have been questioning me for all these hours. Now it's my turn. You stand up like a man, and I will question you. Where were you when the foundations of the earth were laid? And he gives him 64 questions back to back, for which Job says, come to think of it, there are many other questions for which I don't have comprehensive answers, but I have just accepted them. You see, that sense of wonder has an enormous sense of awe to it, which becomes indispensable in life. I recall, during my studies at Cambridge University, studying under one of the leading quantum physicists of our time, Dr. John Polkinghorne, who is a latecomer in his commitment to Christ and delivered lectures to that effect at Harvard University. Dr. Polkinghorne was my professor of science. He's president of Queen's College, Cambridge, a very close friend of Stephen Hawking. And so we would have interchangeably lectures in these matters from these men and so on. I remember Dr. John Polkinghorne telling us how fine-tuned and how intelligible this universe was. And you've heard statistics like that, but I remember one simple illustration he gave, how he said the universe was so finely tuned that the compression and expansion ratio was so precise. He said that a margin of error so small, it would be like taking aim at a 1 square inch object 20 billion light years away and hitting it head on. And this quantum physicist, a leading thinker in his field, going back to the one world theory, explaining the concept of a creator to whom he had now committed his life. But alas, ladies and gentlemen, it is possible in a naturalistic framework for people to still see the wonder, see the grandeur, see all of the loveliness and splendor of this world, all the way from a little child to the world in which we live, and think that it explains itself completely, and in the process lose the wonder. I believe firmly that when wonder has been lost, three things happen. Number one, there is an inevitable reductionism that takes place. An inevitable reductionism that takes place. It all ultimately becomes glandular or matter, and it never can rise to the dignity that some of our lives can and ought to rise to. What Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said in his Nobel Prize-winning speech, the eternal oughtness that forever confronts us. We are not mere flotsam and jetsam in a river of life. But when wonder is lost, reductionism takes its toll. God is like the sun. You cannot look at it, but without it you can't look at anything else. So the loss of wonder ends up in a reductionistic worldview. The loss of wonder ends up with the loss of gratitude, because autonomy reigns supreme and we become completely autonomous to ourselves. What is so intriguing to me, as I travel around in many, many parts of the globe, you can be in the Middle East, you can be in the Far East, you can be in the Orient, where there are hundreds of millions of people, whether rightly or wrongly, please hear me, whether rightly or wrongly, hundreds of millions of people who in some form of religious expression signal a sense of gratitude to a higher power. Hundreds of millions of them, in some form of gratitude, signal an indebtedness and a gratitude to a higher power. We are living dangerously in North America, assuming that by our power and by our will and by our knowledge and by our progress, we don't need to be thankful to anyone anymore. We have pulled ourselves by our technological and economic and intellectual bootstraps. And Arnold Toynbee may well be right. We'll be the first of 21 civilizations daring this kind of an experiment. That sense of a loss of gratitude. I was talking to a man who has committed his life to Christ recently and was on a nuclear submarine and nearly lost his life, and he told me the story of what happened, and something triggered in his conscience that maybe there was more to it than his own humanistic frame of reference. Some time ago, an Air Canada jet took off. I think it had taken off somewhere in the United States and was heading to Ottawa in Canada. At about 10 or 15,000 feet, I don't know how high it was, there was a fire in the washroom of that aircraft. And the pilot was told that a fire had begun there, and immediately he knew there would be very little time left to make his emergency landing. He plummeted. I think it was at Cincinnati, he made an emergency landing. And he hit that runway so hard that the wheels of that plane broke. And if I recall, even the very body of that plane began to break apart as he'd landed. But as the doors were open and the oxygen was just sucked in and the flames were turning it into an uncontrollable blaze, bodies were coming out of the emergency exits, charred and being thrown out, some of them. Many people died. And the last person to leave the aircraft was the pilot himself with his uniform ablaze. And as he walked out and the flames had to be doused out, he avoided all press reporters, went alone into his own room there to mourn the tragedy of what he had witnessed. Let me ask you something. Isn't it true that if one of your loved ones had been rescued, you'd want to go and grab that man by the hand and say, "Sir, thank you for what you've done for me, for my family, for my loved ones." Or even if you'd lost one, "Thank you for trying to save the lives of my family. You were truly the captain of your ship till the very last moment when your own life was in jeopardy there." Wouldn't you want to reach out to that hand and say thank you? Because it's natural. May I suggest that if your children and mine wake up on Christmas morning and have somebody to thank for putting candy into their stockings, have you and I got nobody to thank for putting 2 feet into ours? The whole idea of gratitude, may I suggest to you, is indispensable for existence.
As children, we're captivated by the simple and the fanciful. But as Ravi pointed out, when we grow up, we lose that sense of wonder in a world in which we're told that the natural is all there is, and that the universe needs no greater explanation than chance. What meaning can our lives have if our universe itself is meaningless? Through science and technology, we've tried to explain everything from sexuality to astrophysics with cold, hard facts. Ravi told us that when wonder has been lost, dignity is lost too, as man is reduced to mere matter. Moreover, we lose our sense of gratitude, and pride reigns in our lives. Ravi warned that we are living dangerously in America, assuming that by our power we can climb to greater heights. He reminded us that gratitude is indispensable for existence. Ravi's message, In Search of Meaning, is available through Ravi Zacharias International Ministries as part of a 3-tape album entitled The Veritas Forum at Ohio State University. The album features 2 presentations by Ravi at the university during the 2nd National Veritas Forum. When ordering, ask for tape CA303, The Veritas Forum at Ohio State University. That's CA303, the Veritas Forum at Ohio State University. Listeners in the United States may place their credit card order by calling 1-800-448-6766. That's 1-800-448-6766. The order line is available 24 hours a day. When you place your order, ask for your free copy of Ravi's newsletter, Just Thinking. The newsletter contains articles by Ravi and members of his ministry team that can be a helpful tool for understanding the issues of our day. To order online, go to rzim.org. There you'll find information about Ravi's ministry, essays and articles, and archived files of the Let My People Think broadcasts. The Online Resource Center is an interactive, user-friendly way to preview and order resources. If you prefer to write, address your envelope to RZIM, Post Office Box 921939, Norcross, Georgia 30092. In Canada, write to 50 Gervais Drive, Suite 315, Toronto, Ontario, M3C 1Z3. Please be sure to give us the call letters of the station when you contact us. Knowing which station you're listening to helps us better evaluate the effectiveness of the broadcast. This weekly program, Let My People Think, is a listener-supported radio ministry and a production of Ravi Zacharias International Ministries, Atlanta, Georgia.